Kings and Queens, today we're going to look at a positional masterpiece played by Anish Giri, your favorite Grandmaster at the FIDE Grand Swiss 2025. By ultimately beating Hans Niemann, Anish is one of the top 2 players in this tournament, and the top 2 players do go to the candidates, so this is a monumental victory for my fellow countryman Anish Giri. So let's take a look at how Anish outsmarts Hans Niemann and shows the might of the bishop pair. So this game opens up with c4, and we get knight f6, knight c3, and now e5, the reverse to Sicilian. Yeah, and Anish had some absolutely devious prep in this line. Yeah, we all know Anish made the knight of course, so he's clearly well versed in the Sicilian, but now he decides to play knight f3, knight c6, and rather than d3, which has been preferred many times by also our fellow countryman Max Warmerdam, here Anish decides to play e3, and this move more so prepares d4. Now here we get bishop b4, we get queen c2, simply guarding the knight. Yeah, he wants to prevent the doubling of the pawns. Let's say Anish plays a move like bishop e2. Well then Hans Niemann could take bishop takes c3, and now, well, white would have some doubled pawns, which is not something Anish Giri wanted to allow. So therefore he plays queen c2, so that now when Hans Niemann takes, he can take back with the queen. Now, why does Hans Niemann give up the bishop pair? He does this simply so he can play d5 at a later moment to ultimately get him a quick development, right? Because of course here d5, that simply hangs a pawn. So he plays queen e7 first, my bad. But then after a3 played by Anish Giri, he's trying to expand with b4 and really getting some space on the queen side. We ultimately do get that move d5 by Hans Niemann, and now you can see that this queen is kind of vulnerable. Let's say Anish Giri would play c takes d5, well then this would attack the queen. Now you could get the move like e4, and the knight on f3 is a little bit silly, and well, now you can see that clearly the rapid development by Hans Niemann would have paid off. But of course, as you can see, Anish Giri is still in his prep with 142. He is a very well prepared player, so he puts that pawn to d4. Now this move more so just contests the center, allowing a move like e4, but since Anish Giri will be able to take on d5 at a later moment, this really isn't a problem, because, well, if black would have a pawn on c6, perhaps it would be a slight problem that there would be such a nice center. But yeah, clearly the white pieces can just easily contest the center. Yeah, by taking on d5, and the e4 pawn also becomes weak. So instead we get that move ed4, and we get the move knight takes d4. Excuse me. Now here we get knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and c5 attacking the queen, and now we get queen h4. And what you can see that has happened here is basically Anish Giri has 2 bishops. Hans Niemann has a queenside majority, but this is quite risky as later there will be able to come some f3 e4, yeah, establishing a bind. Yeah, and now this seems very distant, but let's have a look at the coming moves and you'll see exactly what I mean. So here we get that move bishop e6, and we get cd5, knight takes d5, and here a very nice move by Anish Giri. Yeah, he could simply take queen takes e7, but now after king takes e7, well, black is fine. And the difference between what Anish Giri plays is this. Anish plays bishop e5, of course checking the king. We get bishop d7, takes, and now he brings back the bishop. And, well, here you can see the bishop is no longer on e6 like in this variation. So essentially, by playing bishop e5, Anish has gained a tempo, because of course bishop e6 is way superior than the bishop on d7, where it really looks at nothing. We get the move rook c8, and now we get the move f3. Yeah, another great move, simply trying to get king f2 and e4 like I drew on the board. It's actually just like I said earlier. You see, Hans Niemann has a queenside majority, but that means Anish Giri has a kingside majority. So basically what Anish Giri wants to do is just to push these pawns, play bishop e3, rook c1, and b4. And then ultimately, you know, these pawns will become kind of vulnerable and the bishops will easily attack the queen's side. So let's see how this plays out in practice. We get that move f6, king f2, king f7, and now we get rook d1, bishop e6, and a little bit of a prophylactic move, if you will, h4. Now this move's actually not best. It was best simply to play the move e4. like I said earlier, follow it up by bishop e3, rook c1, and b4, and just waste no time. Now, why would Anish Giri play h4? Well, here the best move, or well, maybe not the best move, but a move, would be to play that move g5, and now you can see that some of these squares are kind of covered. So this could be a reason why Anish did it, right? So, because now we can kind of fight for the dark squares with knight g6 and knight e5, and also h4 is kind of proactively against knight g6, because then you can maybe push the pawn or play g3, restricting the knight. So anyhow, we get that move h4, and now we get the move b6. Yeah, this is not a great move. Yeah, it's a little bit too slow. You know, it would be way simpler for Hans Niemann simply to trade the rooks, after which you wouldn't really have too many problems. Yeah, it's of course always a little bit better for white, but it's definitely holdable. Now Hans Niemann decides to play this move b6, and you may think, well, what's the difference between rook d8 and b6? I mean, you know, but in fact, time is very important in this position, and by playing rook d8, he immediately gets rooks off the board. But after b6 and e4, we get knight c6, bishop e3. And now again, he had to play rook d8, but here already, you know, you could see something like takes, takes, and b4. And now, after takes, takes, if he takes, that pawn on a7 is hanging. So you can see how important the time is. By playing b6, he kind of neglects his development, in a way. Yeah, and Anish Giri really just puts his foot on his throat, right? So we get e4, knight c6, bishop e3, and now we get the move knight a5. Yeah, eyeing that c4 square, but again, neglecting development. Now here we get the move rook d6, which is a slight inaccuracy, but okay, it's definitely still a good move. But basically rook c1 again was to be preferred. Yeah, simply disallowing that move knight c4, preparing that move b4. Now Anish Giri plays rook d6, and again this gives Hans Niemann the chance to play rook d8. Now for some reason, Hans Niemann does not in fact play this move. So yeah, I actually don't know why. Maybe I'm sort of misunderstanding something. You know, maybe I don't entirely understand their thought process. I'm not sure, but he plays that move rook e8. And now again, you can see it's a little bit better for white. Yeah, because we get that move g4, he stops f5, gains space, and sets his kingside majority in motion. Now hang in there with me, y'all can see this is a boring endgame, but actually it's about to get pretty spicy. You see here, Hans Niemann plays knight b7, and now we get the move rook d2, and now we get the move knight a5, rook d6, knight b7. Now, contrary to what many people would think Anish Giri would do here, which is rook d2 and make a draw, Anish plays that move rook d1. No, it's of course a pretty popular joke, but in fact, yeah, we can see Anish Giri loves these endgames with a slight advantage. So he plays rook d1, plays on, knight a5, and now rook c1. So Anish sort of realizes that this move rook d6 was kind of inaccurate, and yeah, Hans Niemann didn't really punish it by playing rook d8. So now again, Anish Giri is pretty happy. We get king e7, again hesitating way too much. We get the move bishop a6 attacking the rook, and now you may be like, well, why did he force the rook to come to d8? Well, that is because he's gonna take and play b4. Bang. Yeah, and now you can see that rook immediately gets opened as well. So now you can essentially see that white has just achieved everything he wants. Yeah, Anish Giri has totally outmaneuvered Hans Niemann in this position. So we get knight b3, and now we get the move rook c3. Yeah, again, if he were to take, then simply the rook gets in. Yeah. Now here the best move is king d6, defending this pawn, and then after rook d3, it's still more or less winning for white, but it's definitely a better resistance. Yeah, here he plays rook d6, we get takes, takes, and now a beautiful move by Anish Giri. I'm not gonna scream it, we get rook takes b3. Yeah, he simply sacrifices his rook, because when bishop takes b3 is played by Hans Niemann, we get bishop takes c5, and now you can see it's pinned, and yeah, it really wasn't a sacrifice, it was just an exchange. Now here, there's actually only one move for Hans Niemann that could more or less, maybe not save it, but it could definitely put up more resistance. So, pause the video if you will, do it right now. The move is, ladies and gentlemen, pawn to h6. Why? Why pawn to h6? Well, that is because after the move king d7, take, we get this great move by Anish Giri. We get that move g5. Yeah? Immediately contesting these pawns. Now, why not king e3? We're always taught to bring the king out in the endgame, right? Well, now simply Hans Niemann could play a move like h6 and prevent g5. Then he's gonna play g5 himself, and suddenly, if also he gets a king to e5, it's gonna be really hard to actually do anything with these pawns. So, as an example, let's say you get this. g5, you know, something like takes, bishop a6, king e5. Already the position becomes equal, because when f4 happens, you can just take. And, well, if the king goes here to maybe, you know, go this way, well then simply king f4 attacks this pawn. So basically, this is what Hans Niemann should have tried. But of course, Anish Giri is still much better, make no mistake. Anyways, he plays king d7, we get takes, and g5. Like I said, just a great move. We get bishop e6, king e3, king c5, king f4, king d4, takes, and now a couple of waiting moves. a4, or well, I guess it's not really a waiting move, but he pushes the pawn up the board, simply allowing him to, in the future, yeah, if he gets that pawn, the pawn's gonna be easier to promote. That's basically the point. Yeah, we get bishop d7, bishop e2, and now we get a sort of zugzwang situation. Yeah, if Hans Niemann were to move that bishop, let's say bishop c6, then king f5 takes this pawn, and after the move played in the game, king c5, we get a nice move by Anish Giri, e5. Yeah, and now when takes happens, oh, he can simply march up the board with this pawn. Yeah, we see in opposition a classic endgame technique, and then he's just gonna push. Yeah, it's very easy. So instead, Hans Niemann plays king d5, trying so desperately to avoid that. We get takes king e6, and now another nice move, f7. Yeah, because essentially what Anish Giri is doing here is by pushing the pawn to f7, he baits the king back to f7, and now he can get to this rank, gaining the opposition. Yeah, and he's gonna push the pawn, gonna play bishop c4, so it is in this position that Hans Niemann actually resigns the game, and Anish Giri finally qualifies to the candidates. Yeah, I'm really excited for this, as Anish Giri is one of my favorite players, so I do hope he ultimately wins the World Championship. Now, if you guys did enjoy this video, subscribe, like, and I'll catch y'all in the next one.